Tantor Audio presents The Worm at the Core on the Role of Death in Life by Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pyszczynski. Narrated by John Pruden. Introduction. Back of everything is the great specter of universal death, the all-encompassing blackness. We need a life not correlated with death, a kind of good that will not perish, a good in fact that flies beyond the goods of nature. And so with most of us, a little irritable weakness will bring the worm at the core of all our usual springs of delight into full view and turn us into melancholy metaphysicians. William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience. On a rainy gray day in December 1973, philosopher Sam Keen, writing for Psychology Today, trundled down the halls of a hospital in Burnaby, British Columbia, to interview a terminally ill cancer patient who doctors said had just days to live. When Keen entered the room, the dying man told him, with a touch of mortal irony, "You are catching me in extremis. This is a test of everything I've written about death, and I've got a chance to show how one dies, how one accepts his death." The man in the hospital bed was cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker. Becker had devoted his academic career to writing books synthesizing insights from anthropology, sociology, psychology, philosophy, religion, literature, and popular culture to get to the bottom of the ancient question, what makes people act the way they do? In his latest book, The Denial of Death, which he described as his first mature work, Becker concluded that human activity is driven largely by unconscious efforts to deny and transcend death. We build character and culture, he told Sam Keen, in order to shield ourselves from the devastating awareness of our underlying helplessness and the terror of our inevitable death. Now, lying on his deathbed, Becker explained that his life's work had been about coming to terms with the grinning skull looking back at him. Ernest Becker died on March 6, 1974, at the age of 49. Like many visionaries, Becker died too young. 2 months later, The Denial of Death was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. Back in the late 1960s, Becker was an intellectual insurgent. He was immensely popular with students who flocked to hear his lectures. However, colleagues and university administrators were not particularly enamored with an interdisciplinary thinker who drew together ideas from all corners of the academy, public discourse, and popular culture, and who challenged their academic and political orthodoxy. Becker thus became a kind of academic vagabond, drifting from Syracuse University, 1960 to 1963, to the University of California, Berkeley, 1965, where students offered to pay his salary after the anthropology department declined to renew his contract. After a stint at San Francisco State, 1967 to 1969, he found an academic home at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia, 1969 to 1974, where he wrote the second edition of The Birth and Death of Meaning, The Denial of Death, and his posthumously published Escape from Evil. A few years later, in the late 1970s, the three authors of this book met after enrolling in the doctoral program in experimental social psychology at the University of Kansas. We quickly discovered a shared interest in understanding the fundamental motivations that direct human behavior. Our studies and discussions led us to focus on two very basic human proclivities. First, we human beings are driven to protect our self-esteem. Second, we humans strongly desire to assert the superiority of our own group over other groups. But we had no idea what underlies these prides and prejudices until we stumbled upon Becker's books as young professors in the early 1980s. Like the Rosetta Stone, they were to us a revelation. Mixing deep philosophical prose and straightforward layman's language, Becker explained how the fear of death guides human behavior. He illuminated many of the key social psychological phenomena that we had for years been studying and teaching, but without fully grasping. Suddenly, we had a way to understand why we so desperately crave self-esteem, and why we fear, loathe, and sometimes seek to obliterate people who are different from ourselves. Brimming with youthful enthusiasm, we were excited to share Becker's ideas with fellow social psychologists at the 1984 meeting of the Society of Experimental Social Psychology. There, we introduced what we dubbed terror management theory in order to build on Becker's claim that people strive for meaningful and significant lives largely to manage the fear of death. The audience started drifting away as soon as we mentioned that our theory was influenced by sociology, anthropology, existential philosophy, and psychoanalysis. When we got to the ideas of Marx, Kierkegaard, Freud, and Becker, renowned psychologists were storming the conference room exits. Bemused but undaunted, we prepared a paper for the American Psychological Association's flagship journal, American Psychologist. Feedback arrived a few months later. I have no doubt that this paper would be of no interest to any psychologist living or dead, read one rather pithy single-line review, but we kept at the editor, repeatedly asking him to explain why our ideas were unworthy. Our queries outlasted the original editor's tenure, and finally a second, more sympathetic, or perhaps more beleaguered editor gave us something we could work with. Although your ideas may have some validity, he told us, they won't be taken seriously unless you can provide evidence for them. That's when it dawned on us that our graduate training in experimental social psychology had prepared us to do just that. We've spent the last quarter century investigating the influence of the fear of death on human affairs. At first, we conducted the research with our own students. Later, as our theory gained traction, we were joined by colleagues around the globe. Today, terror management theory is widely studied by psychological scientists and scholars in other disciplines as well, yielding an array of findings that go well beyond what Becker could ever have envisioned. There is now compelling evidence that, as William James suggested a century ago, death is indeed the worm at the core of the human condition. The awareness that we humans will die has a profound and pervasive effect on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in almost every domain of human life, whether we are conscious of it or not. Over the course of human history, the terror of death has guided the development of art, religion, language, economics, and science. It raised the pyramids in Egypt and raised the Twin Towers in Manhattan. It contributes to conflicts around the globe. At a more personal level, recognition of our mortality leads us to love fancy cars, tan ourselves to an unhealthy crisp, max out our credit cards, drive like lunatics, itch for a fight with a perceived enemy, and crave fame, however ephemeral, even if we have to drink yak urine on Survivor to get it. Death makes us uncomfortable with our bodies and ambivalent about sex. Awareness of the inevitability of death could easily contribute to our own extinction if we don't change how we deal with it. The fear of death is one of the primary driving forces of human action. In the course of this book, we will show how this fear contributes to human behavior far more than most of us realize. In fact, it drives us so much that any effort to address the question, what makes people act the way they do, is profoundly inadequate if it doesn't include the awareness of death as a central factor. In this audiobook, we present terror management theory and research in conjunction with relevant findings from other fields such as anthropology and archaeology. We also illustrate points with historical and contemporary examples. When describing the research, we've tried to avoid academic jargon and minimize cumbersome technical details. We also tried to enliven the accounts of some of the key experiments by describing them from the perspective of individual participants whose names have been changed. In Part 1, we introduced the basic tenets of terror management theory and the two pillars of terror management: cultural worldviews and self-esteem. In Part 2, we delve into ancient history in an effort to address the question, how did the problem of death arise for our ancestors? And what did they do about it? In Part 3, we consider the impact of intimations of mortality on a wide range of personal and interpersonal endeavors. In the last chapter, we offer some thoughts about the implications of our work for understanding the modern world and coping with the reality of death. Continuing Becker's intellectual journey, our overarching goals are to reveal the many ways the knowledge that we are mortal underlies both the noblest and the most unsavory of human pursuits, and to consider how these insights can lead to personal growth and social progress. Part 1. Terror Management. Chapter 1. Managing the Terror of Death. The cradle rocks above an abyss, and common sense tells us that our existence is but a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. Vladimir Nabokov. Speak, Memory, a Memoir. On Christmas Eve, 1971, 17-year-old Juliane Kupka and her mother Maria, a German ornithologist, were flying from Lima, Peru, in a plane with 90 other passengers over the Amazon jungle. They were on their way to celebrate Christmas with Juliane's father, the brilliant zoologist Hans Wilhelm Kupka, in the city of Pucallpa. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning hit the airliner's fuel tank. The entire plane broke apart in smoke, fuselage, and cinders 2 miles above the gigantic, sparsely inhabited rainforest. Swept from the plane, Juliane found herself flying into the open sky. All was silent. Strapped into her seat, she felt herself tumbling through the air and saw the jungle canopy spinning toward her as she hurtled earthward toward what seemed like her certain death. Her fall was broken by thick foliage. She fainted. When she came to, she unbuckled herself from the still-attached seat and felt around. One shoe was missing, as were her glasses. She felt her collarbone. It was broken. She discovered a deep gash in her leg and a wound in her arm. One of her nearsighted eyes had been swollen shut. The other was just a slit. She was dizzy from a bad concussion, but because she was in shock, she felt no pain. She called and called and called for her mother. No response. She found that she could walk. And so she walked. For 11 days, Juliane stumbled through the Amazon jungle, home to caimans, tarantulas, poisonous frogs, electric eels, and freshwater stingrays. She endured torrential downpours, sucking mud, brutal heat, and the constant onslaught of swarming, stinging insects. Eventually, she found a small creek. Remembering what her father had taught her, that most people tend to live near waterways, she followed the stream to a large river. She waded into the piranha and stingray-infested water and began slowly swimming and floating downstream. Her state of shock saved her. She wasn't really hungry and felt as if she'd been psychologically muffled in cotton, but the clouds of biting, stinging insects tortured her. She tried to rest under the trees, but sleep was nearly impossible. Maggots took up residence in her wounds. Her insect bites became badly infected. She got so sunburned from floating on the river under the Amazonian sun that she bled, but she pressed numbly on. Finally, she came upon a motorboat. She had the presence of mind to pour gasoline from a small tank on the maggots, killing many of them. After a few days, the owners of the boat found her near their small hut and took her to the nearest town 7 hours away. She was the only survivor of the crash. We've all heard amazing tales of people who defied death against all odds. The survivors of the Donner Party and the Titanic, those who lived through the bombings of Dresden, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. Such stories reflect the fact that all living beings are born with biological systems oriented toward self-preservation. Over billions of years, a vast array of complex life forms have evolved, each distinctly adapted to survive long enough to reproduce and pass their genes on to future generations. Fish have gills, rose bushes have thorns, squirrels bury acorns and retrieve them months later, termites eat wood. There seems to be no limit to the marvelous variety of ways creatures of all species adhere to the fundamental biological imperative, staying alive. If you discover a bat flittering around in your closet and you enter the dark space with a tennis racket to kill it, you'll be in for a battle royal because that creature will fight to survive. Even earthworms strenuously avoid death, as anyone who tried to bait a hook can attest. You split them in two, they persist. You try to get them on the hook, they struggle mightily. Once impaled, they defecate on your hand. Unlike bats and worms, however, we humans know that no matter what we do, sooner or later we will lose the battle against death. This is a profoundly unnerving thought. We may think we are afraid to die because our bodies will rot, stink, and turn to dust, because we will leave our loved ones behind, because we've left important things unaccomplished, or because we have the sneaking suspicion that no loving God awaits us, ready to enfold us in His arms. But underlying all these concerns is that fundamental biological imperative. As Julianne Kupke and other survivors have discovered, we will do just about anything to stay alive. Yet we live with the knowledge that this desire will inevitably be thwarted. How did we get into this predicament? Although we humans inherited the basic imperative to survive, we are different from all other forms of life in several crucial ways. We are not terribly impressive from a purely physical perspective. We are not especially large, nor are our senses particularly keen. We move more slowly than cheetahs, wolves, and horses. Our claws are no more than fragile, dull fingernails. Our teeth aren't constructed for tearing into anything much tougher than an overdone steak. But the small band of African hominids from which we descended were highly social, and thanks to evolution of their progeny's cerebral cortices, our species eventually became extremely intelligent. These developments fostered cooperation and the division of labor, and they ultimately led our forebears to invent tools, agriculture, cooking, houses, and a host of other useful things. We, their progeny, multiplied and thrived. Our civilizations took root around the world. The evolution of the human brain led to two particularly important human intellectual capacities: a high degree of self-awareness and the capacity to think in terms of past, present, and future. Only we humans are, as far as anyone knows, aware of ourselves as existing in a particular time and place. This is an important distinction. Unlike geese, monkeys, and wombats, we can carefully consider our current situation together with both the past and the future before choosing a course of action. This awareness of our own existence gives us a high degree of behavioral flexibility that helps us stay alive. Simpler life forms respond immediately and invariably to their surroundings. Moths, for example, invariably fly toward light. Although the moth's behavior is generally useful for navigation and avoiding predators, it can be deadly when the source of illumination is a candle or campfire. Unlike moths, we humans can shift attention away from the ongoing flow of our sensory experience. We aren't inexorably sucked toward the flame. We can choose to act in a number of different ways, depending not only on our instincts, but on our capacity to learn and think as well. We can ponder alternative responses to situations and their potential consequences and imagine new possibilities. Self-awareness has generally served us well. It has increased our ability to survive, reproduce, and pass our genes on to future generations. It also feels good. We can reflect on the fact that each of us is, in Otto Rank's lovely words, a temporal representative of the cosmic primal force. We are all directly descended from and consequently related to the first living organism, as well as to every earth-dwelling creature that has ever been alive or will live in the future. What a joy it is for us to be alive and at the same moment know it. However, because we humans are aware that we exist, we also know that someday we will no longer exist. Death can come at any time, which we can neither predict nor control. This is decidedly unwelcome news. Even if we are lucky enough to dodge attacks by poisonous insects or biting beasts, knives, bullets, plane crashes, car accidents, cancer, or earthquakes, we understand that we can't go on forever. This awareness of death is the downside of human intellect. If you think about this for a moment, death awareness presents each of us with an appalling predicament. It even feels like a cosmic joke. On one hand, we share the intense desire for continued existence common to all living things. On the other, we are smart enough to recognize the ultimate futility of this fundamental quest. We pay a heavy price for being self-conscious. Terror is the natural and generally adaptive response to the imminent threat of death. All mammals, including humans, experience terror. When an impala sees a lion about to pounce on her, the amygdala in her brain passes signals to her limbic system, triggering a fight, flight, or freezing response. A similar process happens with us. Whenever we feel mortally threatened by a car spinning out of control, a knife-wielding mugger, a tightening in the chest, a suspicious lump, extreme turbulence on an airplane, a suicide bomber exploding in a crowd, the feeling of terror consumes us. We are driven to fight, flee, or freeze. Panic ensues. And here's the really tragic part of our condition. Only we humans, due to our enlarged and sophisticated neocortex, can experience this terror in the absence of looming danger. Our death waits like an old roué, as the great Belgian songwriter Jacques Brel noted, lurking in the psychological shadows. This realization threatens to put us in a persistent state of existential fear. The poet W.H. Auden eloquently captured this uniquely human conundrum. Happy the hare at morning, for she cannot read the hunter's waking thoughts. Lucky the leaf, unable to predict the fall. Lucky indeed, the rampant, suffering, suffocating jelly, burgeoning in pools, lapping the grits of the desert. But what shall man do who can whistle tunes by heart, knows to the bar when death shall cut him short like the cry of the shearwater? What can he do but defend himself from his knowledge? This ever-present potential for incapacitating terror is the worm at the core of the human condition. To manage this terror of death, we must defend ourselves. How we manage terror. Fortunately, we humans are an ingenious species. Once our intelligence is evolved to the point that this ultimate existential crisis dawned on us, we used that same intelligence to devise the means to keep that potentially devastating existential terror at bay. Our shared cultural worldviews, the beliefs we create to explain the nature of reality to ourselves, give us a sense of meaning, an account of the origin of the universe, a blueprint for valued conduct on earth, and the promise of immortality. Since the dawn of humankind, cultural worldviews have offered immense comfort to death-fearing humans. Through the ages and around the globe, the vast majority of people, past and present, have been led by their religions to believe that their existence literally continues in some form beyond the point of physical death. Some of us believe that our souls fly up to heaven, where we will meet our departed loved ones and bask in the loving glow of our Creator. Others know that at the moment of death, our souls migrate into a new reincarnated form. Still others are convinced that our souls simply pass to another unknown plane of existence. In all these cases, we believe that we are, one way or another, literally immortal. Our cultures also offer hope of symbolic immortality, the sense that we are part of something greater than ourselves that will continue long after we die. This is why we strive to be a part of meaningful groups and have a lasting impact on the world, whether through our creative works of art or science, through the buildings and people named after us, through the possessions and genes we pass on to our children, or through the memories others hold of us. Just as we remember those we loved and admired who died before us, we feel the same will be done for us. We live on symbolically through our work, through the people we have known, through the memorials marking our graves, and through our progeny. These cultural modes of transcending death allow us to feel that we are significant contributors to a permanent world. They protect us from the notion that we are merely purposeless animals that no longer exist upon death. Our beliefs in literal and symbolic immortality help us manage the potential for terror that comes from knowing that our physical death is inevitable. This brings us to the central tenets of terror management theory. We humans all manage the problem of knowing we are mortal by calling on two basic psychological resources. First, we need to sustain faith in our cultural worldview, which imbues our sense of reality with order, meaning, and permanence. Although we typically take our cultural worldview for granted, it is actually a fragile human construction that people spend great energy creating, maintaining, and defending. Since we are constantly on the brink of realizing that our existence is precarious, we cling to our culture's governmental, educational, and religious institutions and rituals to buttress our view of human life as uniquely significant and eternal. But we don't just need to view life in general this way. We need to view our own life this way. The path to literal and symbolic immortality laid out by our worldviews require us to feel that we are valuable members of our cultures. Hence, the second vital resource for managing terror is a feeling of personal significance, commonly known as self-esteem. Just as cultural worldviews vary, so do the ways we attain and maintain self-esteem. For the Dinka of Sudan, the man who owns the largest herd of long-horned cattle is the most highly regarded. In the Trobriand Islands, a man's worth is measured by the size of the pyramid of yams he builds in front of his sister's house and leaves to rot. For many Canadians, the man who best uses his stick to slap rubber pucks into nets guarded by masked opponents is considered a national hero. The desire for self-esteem drives us all, and drives us hard. Self-esteem shields us against the rumblings of dread that lie beneath the surface of our everyday experience. Self-esteem enables each of us to believe we are enduring, significant beings rather than material creatures destined to be obliterated. The twin motives of affirming the correctness of our worldviews and demonstrating our personal worth combine to protect us from the uniquely human fear of inevitable death. And these same impulses have driven much of what humans have achieved over the course of our history. The idea that knowledge of our mortality plays a pivotal role in human affairs is ancient. It can be found in the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, and ancient Buddhist texts. 2,500 years ago, the Greek historian Thucydides, in The History of the Peloponnesian War, saw the problem of death as the primary cause of protracted violent conflict. Socrates defined the task of philosophy as learning how to die. For Hegel, history was a record of what man does with death. Over the last 2 centuries, these ideas have been taken up by philosophers such as Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, theologians, for instance Paul Tillich and Martin Buber, psychoanalytic and existential psychologists, from Sigmund Freud to Otto Rank to Robert J. Lifton, not to mention enduring works of literature by everyone from Sophocles to Shakespeare to Philip Roth. But in the realm of scientific psychology, the problem of death has never garnered much attention. Even today, many psychologists remain surprisingly indifferent. If you scour the influential contemporary social science tomes that attempt to shed light on matters such as human nature, the mind, culture, religion, war, history, and consciousness, you might conclude that death is not only unimportant, it scarcely exists. This is probably due to the widespread belief that the effects of our relationship to death could not be understood or tested in a rigorous scientific manner. In the post-Freudian era, in which psychology was still struggling to be taken seriously as a legitimate science, psychologists were wary of big sweeping ideas, especially those involving the impact of unconscious thoughts and emotions on everyday behavior. As experimental social psychologists, we wondered about this. Why couldn't these ideas be framed scientifically and then put to the test? Perhaps the scientific method could be deployed to explain exactly how people cope with subconscious existential fears. We began conducting studies in which one experimental group of participants was reminded of their mortality and another control group was not. We wanted to see whether, when reminded of death, people in the experimental groups would intensify their efforts to uphold their culturally acquired beliefs.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?